Before I begin the homily, two announcements. First of all, in front of the poinsettias, there's a basket, and that has little kits that people can take home to bless their houses. It has a piece of chalk, and the tradition is after you said the prayer, you put the letters KMB, Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar, the name of the three kings, KMB 2025, over the lintel of the door. And you can do that at your front door. Some people do it every door. It depends on you. So those are available. Second announcement. This morning, just before I came down up the hill, I found a piece of moldy bread in our pantry. So I broke it up, made it into pieces for the birds, and threw it out. And then I remembered, my gosh, I'm giving communion at Mass. What if somebody has a penicillin allergy? So if you do, receive communion from one of the other Eucharistic ministers. I promise I washed my hands a few times, but you just never know. So just to be safe, if anyone has a penicillin allergy, receive it from the Eucharistic minister. Good? Okay. The Magi arrive to pay homage to the baby Jesus. First of all, who are Magi? Magi are not really kings. They're astronomers, magicians, somewhere in there. It was kind of fuzzy in those days. And they were always trying to figure out the will of the gods. Sometimes they would do that by cutting open a sacrificial animal, looking at its liver. Sometimes in China, they took hip bones of animals, put it on fire, and watched how the bones would crack. And from the cracks, they could discern the future. Well, these Magi, they looked at the skies, and they saw the Star of Bethlehem. But what was that? Fortunately, we have records, astrological records, that date to the 2nd century BC. They're in China. So immediately when the scholars went to the records, they looked to see if it was a supernova. Now, a supernova is a star that's dying, contracts, and then blows up with so much energy you can see it during the day. No supernovas in those years. Was it a comet? Remember when Halley's Comet came through a number of years ago? Well, Halley's Comet did come through, but in 12 BC, way too early. What was it probably? I've mentioned this name a couple times this week, but many of you aren't here for the daily Mass. Most probably it was a syzygy. S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y. Now, if you play Scrabble, that's a great word. What's a syzygy? When you're looking out from the Earth in a straight line, some of the planets line up. And in this case, it was Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And they appeared in the constellation Pisces. So what is that supposed to mean? Jupiter in ancient times stood for the birth of a king. Saturn, the Jewish people. Pisces, the end of time. Can you see how they might see in it? A king is born for the Jews for the end of time. Don't ask me what Mars was there for. Mars was along for the ride, okay? This syzygy only occurs every 805 years. It's remarkable. It appeared right before the birth of Jesus. And what year are we talking? Well, you would think that Jesus was born in 0, wouldn't you? Especially since BC means before Christ, AD means Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. But the monk who invented the modern calendar, his name was Dennis the Short. I don't know whether that was a nickname or his real name. He miscalculated by a few years, because on his calendar, Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. Remember how Herod tried to kill the baby? So the baby was born probably 5, 6 BC. And when did the syzygy occur? 7 BC. Right in time for these Magi. Now, the Magi came a long distance. We're not sure exactly where. The best guess is the area of Iran, where astrology was very big. And in fact, in the Basilica in Bethlehem, the original fresco of the Magi showed people dressed in Iranian clothes, Persian clothes. So it might have been from Iran, hundreds of miles across bandit-infested territory. And that's why they brought the gifts they did: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. You can make them very small and hide them under the skins that you're riding on the camel and the donkey. Originally, it was simply a way of trying not to get robbed. That they were going to be stopped several times along the way by bandits. They had to find small, precious gifts. But these gifts later on were interpreted a different way. Gold was interpreted the gift you give to a king. Frankincense, incense that you burn to God. Myrrh is the one that's a little difficult, foretells the death of Jesus. But isn't that an inappropriate gift for a newborn? It's like going to a baptismal party and giving the mother a deed for a cemetery plot. He's going to die someday, you might as well be ready. But the gifts that they were bringing, again, for very practical reasons, had a greater meaning than even they understood. Okay, what can we learn from all of this? Let's start out with those gifts. A lot of things that we do have greater meanings in the long run we didn't even realize. Simple example. I was working at a parish for a summer in Chicopee, Massachusetts, right near Springfield. And it was a big friary, it had a very nice library, and the rule was you are never to lend these books to the parishioners, because otherwise all the books would disappear. Well, a secular Franciscan came in and asked me for a particular biography of St. Francis. And I thought, St. Francis, he's the saint who gave everything away. Trying to keep this book from being stolen doesn't quite work. So I lent her the book, and she did bring it back. 3 years later, I was visiting that parish. She stops me in the parking lot and told me how much that book meant and the fact that I gave it to her, that it changed her life. For me, it was simply breaking the rules, giving her a book. For her, it was somebody cared. We have no idea how our acts of kindness can be multiplied over time. So to do those small things that for us seem insignificant, when the telemarketer calls you at supper, you always end the conversation, don't you, with, I'll say a prayer for you tonight. Don't you? Letting somebody into traffic. Small things. Smiling at people you encounter along the road. I visited Winona, Minnesota. Midwest nice. I walked into a mall and had to leave after 10 minutes. The people were way too friendly. It was scary. But to be that way, to smile at strangers, to be welcoming, like these magi, maybe the gifts will have a deeper meaning in God's time. Second thing, looking for the signs. I said that in the ancient world, they're always looking for signs. What signs should we look for? Well, it depends on what we're going through and what we're trying to decide. Sometimes the signs are from the outside. I was in Erie, Pennsylvania. 3 people the same day came up to me. And these were not 3 friends. They were 3 strangers. They all said, "Father, have you read the book, The Shack?" And I had not. But after 3 people came up, it was clear I was going to read it that next week. My rule of thumb is 3. If it's 3 times, God's insisting, pushing. So we look for the signs on the outside. You're thinking of going to Calcutta to join Mother Teresa's group, and you put it out of your mind. You open up your email account, and there's an advertisement for discount flights to Calcutta. You open up the National Geographic, a story about Calcutta. You turn on the news, a story about Calcutta. How many times does God have to push that we get these messages from outside? Sometimes we get them by talking to somebody who's spiritual. It doesn't have to be a priest or a nun. It can be somebody who you just trust because this person will tell you the truth. And you bounce it off that person and listen carefully to what they say. Sometimes the message comes in our own bodies. I always love the one 87-year-old Felician sister. She says, "Father, I don't know if it's time for me to retire from teaching kindergarten yet." "Sister, how old are you?" 87. "Are you alert all day?" "Oh no, Father, I fall asleep in the first 10 minutes. Sister, that's a sign. You're living alone and you've fallen 3 times in the past month. That could be a sign. That we have to look at our own bodies. Every day before going to work, you throw up. Either you're pregnant or something at that work is really not good, and something has to be dealt with. So we look for those signs, and very, very rarely do I put God on the spot where I really ask for a clear sign. Most of the time I let God send the message. But there was one time I was in this chapel, and I was going to Romania to teach in our seminary twice a year. And they asked me to come a third time. And it was going to be difficult with the schedule here, and I didn't know if it was a good idea. So I said, "God, if you want me to go, give me a sign." And the flowers in front of the altar start waving. No fan, windows are closed. So what's my immediate response? Can I have another sign? A lot of times discerning, we don't get absolute certainty. We make the best choice we can. But we have to be willing to take risks. Those magi, they're traveling to Israel from Iran. 30 years before this, the Iranians had invaded Israel. So there were hard feelings in this village. They could have been killed, arrested, and yet they took that risk. They could have been robbed on the way, and yet they took that risk. Again, in my own life, I remember February 28th, 1971. I was a senior in high school. I had to decide whether to accept a scholarship to go study biochem or to become a Franciscan, one or the other. And I had to know by the next day. Next day was the deadline for accepting the scholarship or not. So I laid down in bed, and in those days, folks, you're going to have to tell your grandkids and kids what this means. I listened to an audio cassette. They have never seen them, okay? And I just listened to what was on the tape recorder. It was Jesus Christ Superstar. I didn't have a chance. I signed up for the Friars the next day. Taking risks, trusting God when we don't know how we could possibly trust Him. Forgiving somebody who has hurt us deeply. Reaching out to somebody that we're not sure what the reaction will be. Life is filled with taking risks. It shouldn't be absurd risks, but they should be risks that show that we trust that God will get us through this, even if there might be some difficulties along the way. Just like these magi. They didn't know what was coming, and they left with their tails between their legs. But what glory. Now, one last thing. Why did they go home a different route? Because they had a dream. Folks, be very careful of thinking that God's speaking to you in your dreams. It was the last piece of anchovy pizza you ate last night. Dreams very often express our fears, our hopes. They express the confusion of our mind. Once in a great while, God does send a message. But I've gotten into a habit, which I think is not a bad idea. If I identify anyone in that dream, whether they be alive or dead, as soon as I wake up, I say a prayer for that person. Maybe that person was sent by God and needs a little bit more of my love through my prayers. And so let's go out and bring some gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the child who is born for us.